I'm not going to waste your time with preamble, let's just get on with the video. The original RE4 employed tank controls. This control type does not allow the player to strafe. A and D rotates the character left and right. The remake makes use of a far more standard and modern third-person control scheme seen in games such as Dead Space, which allows for omnidirectional movement and an increased number of simultaneous actions. Tank controls tend to be outdated by modern standards, and the reason for this is quite simple. Tank controls, in comparison to omnidirectional movement, allow for far fewer simultaneous actions. Tank controls have the player choose between moving, shooting, turning, and reloading. The omnidirectional movement system used in the remake allows the player to perform many of these actions at the same time. Simultaneous actions give players the feeling of fluidity in gameplay, along with being a more intuitive and realistic movement style. Despite these benefits, there's something to be said about the rigid simplicity of tank controls. When tank controls are employed in a game like the original Resident Evil 4, each action a player performs must be carefully thought out, and this can lead to interesting decision making on behalf of the player. During moment-to-moment gameplay, a simple wrong decision can cost the player precious seconds as they are locked into the action that they committed to. Along with this, tank controls work very consistently. In the aim to make movement more realistic in the remake, the movement is far less consistent than the movement in the original. Leon can feel like he's constantly losing his balance in the remake, and this is even worse when Leon is low on HP. Having said this, the remake controls remarkably well despite the spectacular animation quality. The more the animations become realistic, the harder it is to create a movement system that is accurate and snappy. All this being considered, I can see why the developers decided to change the movement system. This is a considered change that works well for this game, owing to the push for realism. There is a real question, however, of how real games should be, and if we've already crossed the boundary of too far, leading to gameplay sacrifices in the name of modern fidelity. All in all, I think the remake succeeds in balancing realism and mechanics. I just worried the future copycats will learn the wrong lessons from this game. To cap off this section on movement controls, neither movement system is superior to the other. It'll mostly come down to personal preference. Tank controls in this game would feel like a vestige from a forgotten era of gaming. Omnidirectional movement in the original would make the player unstoppably overpowered, as the enemies are designed around Leon's movement in that game. And that is a good segue to talk about the basic enemies of the remake. The remake is littered with familiar faces from the old while sprinkling in some of the new. Just like the rest of this game, the enemies look incredible, and the art team did a great job with crafting the new enemies to be cohesive with the old. I think that remakes are done best when respecting what came before, while still having the confidence to sprinkle in some additions or reworks that would fit into the jigsaw puzzle. Dead Space Remake, from what I've heard, is a game that feels like what the original developers would have made if they were making a game in the 2020s. Resident Evil 4 Remake feels different, but not inherently contradictory to this mindset. The devs clearly respect the original for what it is, and decided to be more liberal with their changes, owing to the age and the renown of the original. The basic Ganados are extremely similar to the Ganados of the original Resident Evil 4. Visually, there are far more distinct models for Ganados, which is good, because seeing numerous of the same model for an enemy can be immersion breaking dependent on the game and the enemy. The original had 5 models for villager Ganados, and this was very noticeable. The remake tries to account for this slightly better, but obviously can't have hundreds of unique Ganado models for each individual enemy. In a world with infinite time and money, this could be possible, but budgets need to go to more important places, and the remake does a good job in this regard. The only area where an increase of distinct models is important is the village. Cultists and army personnel are intuitively uniform, so a focus on countless models for those Ganados would be a waste, but the villagers are not beholden to this standard. We intuitively expect townspeople to look distinct, and noticing the individuality goes a long way to reinforce the horror aspect of these hundreds of individual townsfolk being added to the Plagas hive mind. Mechanically speaking, the Ganados work nearly identically to the Ganados in the original, and it is glorious. Beginning with the similarities to the original, they can be staggered with shots to the head and legs, they can be kicked and suplexed, they have a chance of turning into different Plagas forms when they die, they have weapons which can be swung or thrown weapons can be shot out of the sky, and can be disarmed with a shot to the hand. All of these aspects are pulled straight from the original and work as intended. The new additions to this vast enemy type are just as vast, so I'll try to be brief. One huge change for the Ganados is the new grab attack. Ganados, both unarmed and wielding a one-handed weapon, can grab Leon. This grab takes damage and can be escaped over time with a QTE or near instantly with the cost of knife durability. However, there are two main issues with this attack. I would like to know what hurts the player when Leon is grabbed. Does he just take damage from embarrassment? In higher difficulties, Leon can take significant damage from the grab before being able to use the knife to escape, and intuitively, there's no reason for Leon to hurt so much just being grabbed. An easy fix would be making taking damage from a grab begin as a threshold. You know, like how real neck grabbing and asphyxiation works. This solves an issue of realism and enables the player to avoid damage consistently with the knife attack, both contextually and mechanically satisfying. The other issue the grab has is the ability to be chained together with other attacks and even other grabs. To be fair, this is prevalent throughout the game and exists throughout most of gaming, but grab attacks have the unique property of removing the player's control. There needs to be a huge increase in attention brought to the prevention of players losing control of the character too often and for too long. Aside from the grab, Ganados can now use charge moves with two-handed weapons, can be executed before turning into the Plagas, and can even place bear traps mid-combat. All of these mechanics serve to flesh out the basic enemies even more and increase the number of variables that the player needs to take into account. The Ganados in the castle function the same with differing visuals. However, one Ganado type in the castle and a few on the island have armor on various body parts, forcing the player to focus on new locations on the enemy's body when firing. This is a simple and cost-effective way to shake up gameplay and increase the challenge as the game progresses. Dr. Salvador and the Chainsaw Sisters are very similar to how they were in the original. They consistently one-shot the player with their attacks, leading to becoming an enemy that the player needs to be hyper-aware of. They are often fought with accompanying Ganados, which gives the player options to choose how to deal with them. They work pretty well as mini-bosses. The dog enemies can still suck my dick. I jest, of course. The dogs are improved by happenstance owing to the increased speed of Leon in the remake. The player is now able to account for the speed of the dogs, which work near identically to how they do in the original. The new Tier 0 Plagas is the first enemy that the player encounters. Owing either to the time of day or the Plagas' lack of maturity, the Tier 0 Plagas is a Ganado with the Plagas unable to leave its host, but is still able to control the Ganado corpse, thus resulting in a horrifying, nearly headless Ganado that hyper-focuses on grab attacks. This enemy is fine on its own, mechanically, but adds to the issue that permeate the grab attack when one of these fuckers appears in a swarm of enemies. Perhaps this works as punishment for not making use of the execution mechanics, but I would still say that the grab needs work. The Tier 1 Plagas is identical to the one in the original game, and all Plagas tiers, with the exception of the previous one, are still insta-killed using a flash grenade. I just wish this wasn't so signposted to the player. I praised the original for slightly obscuring this mechanical detail, only learned and achieved through the player's experimentation. The remake just outright tells this to the player on one of the merchant notes. A player can easily beat the game on normal and even hardcore difficulty without this mechanic, and thus it would be a boon to the game for it to require experimentation instead of being signposted so drastically. Maybe include in one of the lore notes that bright lights hurt subterranean parasites, and leave it at that. That would allow the player to use their intuition and be rewarded, or even have a great experience when they find it out for the first time by accident. The Tier 2 Plagas is quite dangerous. It appears in the castle and has the ability to insta-kill the player if they do not parry its bite. This Plagas can also jump and hang from ceilings to attack the player vertically, which is an extremely good way to increase player engagement. This game, like the original, is built quite horizontally and works best that way, as the combat works best on even ground with enemies. Keeping the crosshair at head height is a skill that one needs to learn to be proficient at any shooter. Similarly to the Novistadors, having an enemy which has the ability to play with verticality on occasion can test the player's situational awareness. The Spider Plagus received a full rework. The Spider Plagus used to be an enemy that spawns from its dead host to attack the player itself. The rework is that the spider is always apart from a host, but prioritizes latching onto a Ganado and enraging its new host, causing increased movement speed and aggression. The spider must also be killed separately from its chosen host, meaning an unfocused player could have the spider attached to each Ganado in the area until only the spider remains. This is a wonderful change, as the spider in the original did allow for increased enemy variety, but it was also extremely similar to the other Plagas in the game. It makes sense why the devs would want to have the spiders distinguish themselves from the other Plagas, as they are so unique in their design compared to the other enemies. There's even a chance that this takeover ability was the original plan for spiders in the original. In the original, there's a lab on the island, which was also recreated in the remake. It shows a spider attached to the back of what can be assumed to be an unfortunate Ganado. Maybe this lab was made in the original with the intention of the spiders using this takeover power. But maybe it's backwards. Maybe the remake devs wanted to change the spider, and their inspiration for the new mechanic was this room. Either way, this is a massive improvement which also adds to the elements of body horror. Brutes are a brand new enemy that fit into the game seamlessly. This enemy allows for an increase in enemy variety in the village, where there previously were only chainsaw enemies and Ganados. The Brute's attacks force the player to make use of the crouch mechanics, which also functions as a dodge for some specific attacks. He feels like a tutorial at times, a way to teach the player about dodging before they encounter bosses where dodging is incredibly important. The Garrador is nearly identical to the enemy in the original. The crouch and knife mechanics do wonders for this enemy. However, these additions cause the devs to need to buff the Garrador, allowing it to be more punishing. Every so often, this enemy can feel unfair, owing to long, wide swinging combos that could have been toned down just a tad. The Summoner has also been reworked in the remake. It isn't strong on its own, but it has the ability to cause many Ganados in its vicinity to turn into tier 1 or 2 Plagas. If the summoner isn't dealt with fast, it can be easy to become overrun. This is a great change as it fits the thematics of the remake. The minigun was goofy as fuck, and I'm glad it's gone. The Knights play a greater role in the castle as the enemy used for Ashley's section, and they do that job well. They are well telegraphed and have a unique kill condition with the helmet and armor that is not reused really at all in the game. They are similar to the old Knights, and the damage requirement to remove their helmet is far more fair in the remake. Novistadors are the same as in the original, but the camo is much more fair. Props to the devs for making them have real camo instead of being completely invisible. I spoke earlier about how small additions of verticality can be a great way to further engage the player. Despite this, it is also true that too much verticality is often disorienting and can become a chore to deal with. The devs put this into account, as these enemies very rarely appear alongside ground enemy types, and also seem to have a maximum height from Leon that they will fly, allowing them to not fly so high that they become unfair or annoying. And finally, regenerators. The regenerators are as fierce as they were in the original. The original has a knife exploit that rendered them useless if the player chooses to engage in that tactic, and fortunately, that was not carried over to this game. The regenerator's biggest change is its range, speed, and weak spots. In the original, the weak spots were only visible via a thermal scope, and the only other way to defeat them was using an obscene amount of force. The remake does not allow the player to brute force the regenerators, although sometimes it may come across that way on the surface. The regenerators' weak spots in the remake are visible via a biosensor scope, but it can also be seen if the player shoots their body in the correct locations. This means a player can learn the common regenerator weak spot locations, or shoot them at random and easily beat them without the use of a thermal scope. This goes a long way for allowing different playstyles and loadouts to succeed, as a rifle was a near hard requirement for defeating these guys in the original. They are just as terrifying, if not more so than in the original, and this extends even more to the Iron Maiden. It is a huge step up from the original's Iron Maidens. The Iron Maiden is a second phase given to some regenerators that force the player to aim for the head to defeat them. The player must also defend themselves from on-death effects. All these changes to the regenerators make them a far more fierce enemy, as a panicking player will struggle to defeat them, but they can be mastered by a player who is focused, or by players who engage in the use of the biosensor. This is an enemy that has had a tremendous yet subtle improvement over the original, and I'm very impressed with what the devs pulled off here in keeping mechanics from the original while improving upon them immensely. There's no better segue than to just begin, so let's start discussion on the next major topic: combat. The knife in the original is a fantastic tool that provides infinite utility to the player if they choose to use it. The knife is used to break boxes and deal damage to enemies. The knife is very simple. The player presses the button that has Leon hold the knife, and then the player can swipe. The knife is fantastic for conserving ammo on boxes, snakes, and downed Ganados. Some players of these games even manage to beat the games using only a knife. The Resident Evil 4 Remake devs saw the knife fight with Krauser and wanted to remove the QTEs to make the fight more engaging. QTE means Quick Time Event, and refers to a player needing to press specific or multiple buttons fast, or repeatedly spam one button in a limited time frame. The original RE4 was a game that made heavy use of QTEs, but over the years the use of QTEs has gone down in favor of what I'll call simply RTEs, real-time events. Instead of pressing a button to pass a prompt, the player is actively engaging in mechanics and actions that require fast action during moment-to-moment gameplay without interrupting the flow. The best example of this is a parry system, which is exactly what the developers decided to add for the Krauser fight. After doing so, their testing revealed how engaging the parry system was, and they made the executive decision to allow the player to parry throughout the entire game. So now in the remake, we have the usual swipe, but now they added a quick stab and the player can parry with the knife. What else? Using the knife, players can also execute transforming Ganados, perform stealth kills, insta-kill enemies carrying Ashley, instantly escape a grab, and can stab staggered enemies for massive damage. To attempt to balance this new surge of power that Leon has at his disposal, the devs gave the knife durability. I was very apprehensive when I heard of this before the game came out, and now I've had lots of time with the knife, I have a greater understanding of where it works and doesn't. Let's break down each aspect to find what works and what doesn't quite. The stab and swipe, I feel, exist in tandem with the execute mechanic. Why? The most common use of basic knife attacks in Resident Evil 4 is to finish off downed Ganados. This works perfectly with Ganados that the player kicked to the ground and wants an easy kill on, but what of the transforming Ganados that require execution? The execution uses a large portion of durability, which makes sense, right? You are preventing an enemy from coming back stronger with a second health bar. Almost instantly at that. That has to be worth a lot. True. But what if you just stab it to death while it's transforming? It uses but a fraction of the durability, for the same goal. This is a problem, and there is an easy fix for this issue. Have the execution be more expensive the more enemies are near Leon. As it stands, the only reason to use the execute is if there are many enemies in an encounter and you need the speed and iframes that come with executing an enemy. If the execution is cheap when you're alone with a Ganado, then there's a reason to still use the mechanic other than what it is currently. The high damage stab and stealth kills are strangely cheap, especially seeing as the player can stealth insta-kill a brute. An easy fix is to either increase the durability cost across the board, or scale the cost based on the enemy in question. The issue with the knife's usage on grab attacks is more of a top-down issue. The issue relating to how the knife interacts with the grab depends entirely on the grab's issues being fixed. The major durability cost would be fair if the knife allowed the player to avoid damage completely. As it stands, the player loses far too much health before the knife is able to be used for this skill to be considered balanced. The parry is wonderful. It works extremely well and allows a skilled player to have more tools to avoid damage. It has many feats of spectacle as well, allowing the player to dismember unarmed punches and even block chainsaws. The sound designers did great work as well. The durability cost is fair, and I love how Professional difficulty uses the parry timings as a way to increase difficulty. Professional has other issues I'll get into, but as it stands, the parry requirements in Professional is a great way to reward the skilled and punish mistakes. I appreciate how there are also certain moves that must be dodged and cannot be parried. All good action games know that making every single move parryable is a bad idea. Even Sekiro includes moves that players should jump over, and parrying is that game's entire combat system. This is a mechanic that, I think, should be included in every Resident Evil game of this type. If RE9 takes its gameplay philosophy from this game, then I might genuinely be down to play it. Hell, maybe Ashley will be our secret agent protagonist. I'd be so fucking down for that. But enough speculation. We were talking about combat, and it's time for the other shoe to drop. The gunplay is this game's core. It is unfortunate that it contains the game's greatest weakness despite a lot of the gunplay being exceedingly strong. The biggest issue in this game when it comes to guns is bloom. Bloom, for the unaware, is the random bullet inaccuracy that the player suffers when shooting fast, moving, and turning. The original RE4 is very unique in how the game uses a red dot to aim every single gun. This made every gun viable and consistent. The remake allows the player to attach a red dot on certain pistols and is an innate quality of the Killer 7 Magnum. Not having every gun use this is a blessing and a curse. A pistol will tend to be the most used weapon a player uses on a first playthrough, and having the inclusion of a red dot be a part of the decision of what gun to run could have been interesting if the bloom wasn't so egregious without it. The bloom is way too much, and there's one specific reason why. Why the fuck is there bloom when I move the camera? Bloom is a way to limit a player's accuracy while they are moving. It is often required when a game uses omnidirectional movement to offer balance. In exchange for movement, you must offer up some accuracy. The issue in this game is that even when a player is standing still, the bloom will still be in effect if the camera is moved. This makes a bloom system redundant in a game where I'm shooting movement targets throughout the entire runtime. I responded to some of the Actman's points on the remake on a stream I did a little while back, and he said that,
"What's cool is the player is still encouraged to stop and aim as if they're playing the original, because it makes your shots more precise. You can see how big of a difference this makes on your accuracy and crosshairs when you're moving or not."
I would love it if the game encouraged stationary shooting as a way to balance movement and as a way to encourage playing the game like the original, where shooting and moving could not be done simultaneously. That isn't why the bloom is there, nor can it simulate that playstyle because the bloom is fundamentally flawed. In a game like Borderlands, aggressive bloom can maybe be argued as an issue, but in a game like Resident Evil 4, where every bullet counts and is integral to my resources, especially on professional difficulty, bloom fucking up shots is the game's biggest flaw and is unacceptable. This is only rectified with the inclusion of the red dot. For the best shooting experience in this game, the best options are to take a pistol that can use a red dot, a sniper, as the scope renders it accurate, and the Killer 7 because the bloom on the other Magnums is god-awful. I don't know how this system made it into the game. Maybe the devs really wanted the player to use a red dot, but it was way too strong to have on every gun. Therefore, this is what they conjured up in its place. By doing so, shotguns are prone to whiff unless you shove the barrel in an enemy's face, and some machine guns don't exist. The more I think about it, the more bloom becomes a very odd choice because the bloom is supposed to offset the strength of moving and shooting, but the red dot is fully accurate while moving as well. And that is probably the most negative you'll see me act towards this game. For whatever reason, the bloom is extremely flawed. I think the entire gun roster should have kept the red dot, and if they remake 5 or create RE9 in this style, then I hope an issue like this is ironed out. The rest of the discussion on guns is far more positive, because once the red dot is in your hands, oh boy, you can do some cool shit. Just like in the original, enemies are very responsive to your shots, and shots can do a variety of things. Anything from exploding dynamite in a Ganado's hands, to putting them on their knees ready to be suplexed. Standard enemies in this game can be hit with a melee kick or suplex if Leon staggers them. Melee attacks are very useful as they control crowds and allow the player some time to strategize or to continue the offensive as the enemy recovers. It is a staple mechanic, and the return of it in the remake is very welcome. However, there is one criticism levied at this game that I want to attempt to counter. There is an argument that states that the fact that enemies in this game require an inconsistent number of bullets to be staggered is an issue. The original is well known for being arcade-like in the way that everything works the way it does all the time. There is barely any room for inconsistency in the original. The old game is able to accomplish this by being quite simple in its mechanics from the onset. The Resident Evil 4 remake adds new mechanics, and thus when rebalancing occurs, one of the options is to decrease the consistency, and this is what they chose. But they didn't have to lower the consistency on the stagger, they could have changed something else. This is true. However, the reason that the consistency was first to fall was that the balance required it. Allow me to explain, in defense of inconsistency. The times when a stagger is not landing is the most impactful to the player is during an enemy's attack animation. In the original, a player can stagger an enemy mid-attack animation to defend themselves, an inherently defensive action. The player can do the same in the remake, but the inconsistency can decide to not give the player the stagger, causing them to take damage. The reason why this heavily consistent defensive action was nerfed in the remake is that there's a brand new hyper-consistent defensive action. That would be the parry. If a parry is well executed, then the player gets the same effect they would have in the original if they shot an attacking Ganado. The error is not with balance, but with what actions you choose as a player to take. This defense does obviously not account for when the player is trying to get a stagger for a different cause, but it is a defense for when the inconsistency of the stagger seems at its most frustrating. Also, just by the way, this is a defense for hardcore difficulty and below. I 100% agree that 5 shots to stagger on professional is a little silly. It'll make your gun start to feel anemic. And with that, we've covered all the main mechanics and can cover a few of the lesser mechanics of this game. Wait, I have a feeling there are a few people I still need to mention. The bosses of Resident Evil 4 Remake are a standout. There isn't a single boss which is a letdown. Very few of them use a gimmick, unlike the original where most of them use some kind of gimmick to defeat. Every boss is improved upon to some extent. We are not starting off strong, however. I kinda even forgot about Del Lago. The big fish is slightly improved just owing to the ability to move while throwing harpoons. Overall, it is still not all that great. El Gigante is good, but there are a few attacks that don't seem fair. The wide sweeping attacks seem unavoidable, and his throwing a house can also be an unavoidable damage source depending on where the player is when El Gigante decides to use it. A great new addition is his Plaga's weak spot persisting even when he isn't downed, allowing a skilled player to hit crucial shots or else miss him entirely. Risk reward at its finest. Mendez is no longer weak to fire as the incendiary was removed. He is now a battle of timing, dodging, and repositioning to get the best openings to punish his sweeping attacks. He attempts to throw barrels at the player as well. This fight is fair and allows for a multitude of strategies. An all-around bullshitless fight. Verdugo still scares the shit out of me. His arena is far more interesting as there are now more rooms and directions to go with items to collect. His gimmick is still the nitrogen, but what I like is the more forgiving nature of the fight. Verdugo now has moves that can move him very quickly, so to make him dodging nitro not feel unfair, the nitro is now vents that can be reused until that specific vent hits him. The double El Gigante fight is mechanically fine, being improved by the camaraderie of fighting him with Luis. Salazar's fight was one I was unsure about during my initial playthrough. It was strange, the goo felt unfair, and his weak spot was hard as fuck to hit. Upon subsequent playthroughs, and higher difficulties, I now see how well Salazar is designed. All his attacks are quite well telegraphed and avoided by different movements and by using terrain effectively. He also can be damaged anywhere on his body, so his small weak spot is less of an issue owing to his overall large hitbox. The fight is one that may need to use a lot of resources, but also does a good job of dropping items when most needed. It would also be remiss of me to not mention his weakness to golden eggs. It's nice to see when a big AAA release like this indulges in creative little details and silly mechanics. Krauser's gauntlet phase makes much more sense. No more hiding keys for no random reason. He is testing Leon for as long as he can until he is forced to go all out. Krauser makes great use of needing to alternate between parries and dodges, and he even has an unblockable that can only be avoided by repositioning to high ground. His knife-only fight earlier on in the game is a standout too, and is fantastic. It clearly shows how much work they put into the parry system. Sadler is extremely similar to the original Sadler. He is improved simply owing to the larger health bar and moveset. His new second phase is also a fantastic spectacle. And now as we move on to secondary mechanics of the remake, I just want to thank everyone who is still watching at this point. Your enjoying of my content means a great deal to me. Let's press on. The merchant is back in full force with a few added mechanics. All the old mechanics are done justice, so I'll just mention the new ones. The merchant now tells you which key items are finished with, allowing them to be sold. Not a massive change, but a way to make each key item feel more important. A critique I had of the OG RE4 was how pointless key items felt, as the player always only ever needed them for one purpose, and were usually the only key item they ever held at a time. Having them sellable is a little change that goes a long way to make key items feel more impactful. The merchant now also has requests that can be completed to earn spinels for his special shop. The requests are a neat little side objective that don't intrude much, but add an incentive to be thorough during a playthrough. Objectives off the beaten path are few and far between, but also tend to contain the best rewards. I also like how the merchant will signpost to the player when they reach a section that blocks off the area they're at. I like the map not being fully backtrackable. It makes the events seem more permanent and adds to the sense of progression, a constant feeling of there's no turning back now. It strengthens the horror aspects of the game. This being the case, I'm glad the game will let you know when the time comes to leave an area behind for good. The treasure system feeds into the merchant systems, and thus this is a great time to talk about one of the best systems in the game. The new treasure system is an augment of the original and is designed beautifully. There are treasures that have slots, and there are gems that can be fitted into these slots. Throughout the game, you will find gems of 2 shapes and 5 different colors, which will all give different bonuses to the treasure's value, depending on which colors are slotted. It is a system that rewards careful consideration and patience. It's like a little mini-game within the game that adds a lot to the treasure system. The inventory system is another mini-game within this game. This inventory is seen as one of the best in gaming owing to its simplicity and complexity. This system has already been talked about to hell and back since the original was released, so what I want to mention is the auto-sort feature that some began to complain about. There is no issue with an auto-sort button, as it is nothing more than a time saver for those who do not wish to engage in the inventory system. The inventory system is great, but even I can admit that I abuse the auto-sort on repeat playthroughs. I suppose a good trade-off with the auto-sort button is that it sorts optimally, not beautifully. Your case will be a mess with the auto-sort, but it will be optimized. Some of the items that will be filling up Leon's inventory are crafting materials. Crafting is a new system that allows the player to craft specific ammo type that the player wants at a time. This system also allows the player to purchase recipes for different grenade types and ammo types. It is a way of reducing RNG, which is always helpful, but it can be a burden with all the crafting materials which need to be stored. I don't mind its inclusion, as I feel it is an extension of the combination system of the original RE4. I don't have much to say about Ashley's mechanics. The old system worked for the original game, but I'd see why they'd want to change it. She can sometimes just path strangely or get herself killed now, but I think her having some more agency to move around isn't always a strict negative. The shooting range is now contextualized in the gameplay far more with the charm system. Charms are a way to alter the variables of shopping, crafting, and combat. The charm system is unfortunately quite shallow. It is also completely dictated by RNG. This is a shame, as there was an opportunity here to create charms that allow for different player builds, but that would only be possible if the player didn't receive them at random. The randomness means that each one could not be all that special, but also makes the ones that are strong exceedingly so. The price reduction charms for armor and knife durability are immensely powerful, but locked behind a random drop. Some kind of shop system or way to prioritize certain charm types would go a long way towards making time spent in the shooting range more rewarding. Most other mechanics, like item acquisition and weapon upgrading, works identically to how they did in the original. Therefore, if you want to know what I think about how well those are done, watch my OG RE4 video. We've come to the story section of the video. We've spoken about the mechanics in depth, and it's time to see now where all of the major improvements are. How well the game does as a remake versus how well of a game it is on its own are two different questions. Both are important questions because the devs are locked into some aspects of the game's mechanics and story owing to it being a remake. I will answer the question of how it fares as a standalone game versus a remake at the end of the video, so stick around for that. They did what they could with the story to make improvements, but it is also by no means perfect. It is quite flawed, but it is easily leaps and bounds better than the original. So without further ado, we start with 3 distinct cutscenes. The second cutscene is where the story discussion starts. The remake takes greater effort to slot in its story with that of RE2's. The retelling of RE2's story is now from Leon's perspective, rather than just a factual recap of events. Leon has lasting pain from his prior experience. This goes a long way to make Leon more believable. He's more of a character now. This cutscene also foreshadows Krauser while setting up Leon as a trained badass for the US. I just want to mention credit to the VA where it's due. Leon's VA, Nick Apostolides, does a stellar job. He has stated that he loves the OG RE4, and he kills this role. The original Leon wasn't acted terribly given the script he was handed. The original had some amazing goofiness, but I can see the VA using a role like that to just have some fun. The original VA feels like he knows he's in a goofy story and is performing directly to the player. Nick takes great care to have the dialogue sound far more grounded with the darker aspects of the new story, while also having a level of gravitas to make the cheesy lines fit in perfectly. The goofy lines now feel like things that someone would say in Leon's situation to lighten the mood. An all in all 10 out of 10 performance from Nick. Pure passion emanates from his performance. We open this story at night. The old game started closer to dusk, but this change allows for the opening to have the more spooky aspect the writers want. One of the officers dies pissing and Leon has to find him. I really like that Leon speaks Spanish here. It's just a nice touch. Once again, we are searching for Ashley. We find the dead policeman, as the other is presumably getting captured. Leon makes his way through the spooky village until we meet up with Luis. Luis is still a ball of fun. His asking to need a smoke works well as it sets up his death scene, and we learn in a lore text that his asking for a smoke is the code phrase to identify who's working with Ada. Leon gets his stuff taken and is injured just like in the OG. Luis doesn't lie about being a cop this time, instead being less forthcoming and instead not giving away much information because Leon is less keen to interact with him. Leon is vying for the priority of escaping and only stops his pursuit of freedom once Luis gives him a lead. They then work together to escape, and it's quite lucky that the Ganado with the key randomly walks in to kill them when this makes no sense, because if they should have been killed, they would have happened already. These situations are a large portion of where the game's story fails. We have far more to say on character, but the plot is full of crazy coincidences and contrivance, luck, and plot armor. The character work is where the game shines, despite work going in to fix plot issues from the original 2. Luis escapes and Leon fights his way to Mendez, who lets him live owing to the plagas growing inside him. I like Mendez's new religious zealousness. It is also found in Sadler. Playing up the religious aspects of the story achieves a lot. Not only does it add to the horror aspects, but it also adds to character motivations and plot happenings. In this house, Leon also receives the info that Luis worked for Umbrella. Leon has a massive hate boner for Umbrella as the company that put him through such a horrible event in Raccoon City. Leon continues to make his way through the village until he meets Ashley. Ashley's VA is phenomenal. Genevieve Buchner, I'm sorry if I butchered that surname, does an incredible job. This seems to be her first VA role, working as a live-action actress before RE4, and it shows that she cut her teeth very well on horror roles, as her screams and yells pierce my soul with how they're performed. She also kills the other aspects of Ashley's character in the quieter moments and dialogue-heavy scenes and little quips that she makes while you're playing. 12 out of 10, she kills this role. Ashley runs away and Leon catches up as we receive the first feat of bravery for Ashley to complete. She must drop from a window and let Leon catch her. This is a thread that continues until the end, of Ashley having a small arc with her increasing bravery. They make their way to the Luis cabin, and Luis doesn't harass Ashley. Now that's some character growth. Leon is justifiably angry about Luis ditching earlier, but now once the cabin fight is completed, we get a better conversation about the state of affairs between them. Luis lets them know they've been injected with the Plagas, and he knows how to help them, establishing a working relationship between the three. Once Mendez is dealt with, Leon and Ashley make their way to the castle and talk with Salazar. We don't get the "no thanks bro" line, but we get our introduction to the villain of the castle. Salazar is far more toned down in absurdity, but I think that Salazar should have been the only one that remains wacky. It would have added to the story to have some increased contrast between all the villains. The first major improvement to the plot is how Ashley becomes captured. In the original, we get this monstrosity. Oh, there's a cutscene down here.
You alright?
I'm fine! Leave me alone!
Ashley, wait!
Why did she do that? You're a fucking idiot. What the fuck? What? In the remake, we instead make use of the body horror aspect of mind control, as Ashley is controlled for a brief time by Sadler to get herself captured. The experience being so horrid for Ashley that she proceeds to run to find a safe place to break down. This is a wonderful change that has her capture make so much more sense, and adds to the theme of bodily autonomy being taken away. Next up is Ada. I'm not going to harp on her VA, I'd be flogging a dead horse at this point. The only thing I want to add is that it isn't all too clear to me whether this is a directorial issue or a VA issue. Either way, it is a letdown. Once Leon catches up to Ashley, we get a scene with them just taking a moment to talk. Ashley is given a character. In the original, she was nothing, just an annoying girl you had to save. Here, she and Leon are having an actual conversation. She starts by being upset that she might hurt Leon, and that the lack of control makes her feel terrible. Leon gives her some words of inspiration, and even tries to lighten the mood with a little joke. This scene does so well to add to Ashley's bravery arc, and it brings Leon and Ashley closer together. It's such a good scene. And now as we progress, we get some flirty lines from Leon and Ashley.
So, you do a lot of missions like this?
Well, yeah, but I'm not used to having such good company.
Oof.
Is that a compliment?
Take it however you want.
Maria.
Hey, Leon, there's some armor. Bet you could use it like a bulletproof vest.
Little old-fashioned for my taste.
That's a bit of a...
Dad, I think you'd look pretty dashing.
It's just some nice and tasteful flirting while we're on a more chill part of the game before the story ramps back up. After this, we get a fantastic cutscene with great choreography with Leon dispatching multiple Ganados. Scenes like these really do go a long way to convince us players that Leon as a character is actually able to overcome the situations we're controlling him in. All his animations, in fact, portray Leon as a very proficient and capable agent. Ashley has her section, but once again becomes captured by the Verdugo. Once we catch up to her, we see that she is going through a ritual with black ooze of some kind. These religious parts of the story are yet again another addition to answering the question of why doesn't Sadler just let Ashley go home so this plan will succeed faster. Now we know why in the remake. They are a religious cult having a religious ceremony and events, and the villains want to get that done before they let her loose. It is such a small change that adds just that tiny bit more flesh to the villains, while fixing a few of the minor issues of the plot from the OG. The upcoming conversation with Luis shows how he's trying to make up for his past, both as an Umbrella researcher and as a scientist that worked for the Los Illuminados cult. Luis here gets far more screen time than he did in the original, has gameplay sections with Leon, and tells Leon himself how he feels instead of the information being contained in lore entries like in the original. It builds their character dynamic far more than the original too. But Luis does die here. I like that Krauser kills Luis though. Sadler killing Luis in the OG doesn't make too much sense, but this works far better. Krauser and Leon have a chat while they fight, giving a bit more depth to Krauser and his relationship with Leon. It's still quite vapid, but it's more than what we had before. Luis caps off his story by saving Leon and finally getting his smoke. There is also great dialogue as he passes, his mind still focused on whether he's redeemed himself or not. A tragic end to a character that would have wanted to add more good to the world while he could. Just as a small bit, Leon shooting Salazar here is a fucking great moment. And we proceed onto the island, with Leon able to have a conversation with Ada about the time spent between the events of RE2. Ada points out that Leon hasn't changed. Deep down, he's still the rookie cop that just wants to help people and do right by the world, and he is torn up because he feels like he's failed in RE2. This subtle depth added to Leon really does go a long way. We then progress and save Ashley, and this little moment for Luis is fantastic, and I'm so happy that it's here.
Where's Luis?
He's worried about you. Until the end. Come on.
We carry on moving, and Ashley is far more confident. She's grown ever so slightly since her experiences in the castle, and she needed to muster her courage to continue. We carry on and meet Sadler close to the end, in the room where many Plagas are stored. Sadler is the biggest proponent of the religious zealousness being tuned up, and it characterizes him quite quickly. He is the religious leader of the Plagas, and he is the one who is able to control the rest of the cult. He takes control of Ashley, and the biggest moment of plot armor hits the screen. The sheer luck of this moment is off the charts, and instead of capturing Leon here, or killing him, Sadler just lets him go in the hope that Krauser deals with him. We were having a string of great story moments, but this scene is the worst part of the entire story. Krauser is dealt with and we press onwards to save Ashley. Leon's big character moment is here as he pushes past his limits to complete his mission and save Ashley. Ashley also gets her big character moment here as she is able to save Leon and confidently assert her help. These two have come quite a long way and it shows. It's nothing revolutionary story-wise, but it's here, and it's done competently. Ashley and Leon are done major justice compared to their 2005 counterparts. The game ends with defeating Sadler, and Ashley decides to be more subtle about wanting to fuck Leon. The credits are also pretty neat, telling a small story of the village's turn through images. And that's the RE4 Remake. There are countless of improvements and places where the game needs work. The story is overall improved drastically, and the mechanics live up to expectations despite having more downfalls than the original has. Most of the mechanical issues come down to inconsistency, which, for many people, isn't as great an issue as these issues are only exceedingly prevalent in professional difficulty. They are still issues, but playing the game on normal or hardcore will still be a treat because of the core game being fantastic. This game shows that focusing on mechanical prowess is what people want out of a big AAA game. The game runs smooth as butter and I didn't encounter a single bug. With mercenaries, fun for a few hours, and Separate Ways DLC probably on the way, there is still more to this game than just the main story I didn't even mention. I didn't even mention how amazing the achievements are. The achievements give the player new ways to play the game and challenges, instead of being bog standard chores. Getting achievements are super rewarding and have real weight, like completing the game without healing, or only using a pistol and knife. It's great. And now that I've finished dumping praise and levying criticism, there are a few questions you are probably waiting for. Original versus remake. I have a personal preference for the remake, but I think overall they stand on even footing. They both succeed in places where the other falls flat, and both offer similar yet extremely unique and strong experiences. I recommend them both wholeheartedly. What would I give as a number score? As a remake, I would give it a 9 out of 10. As a game, maybe a 7.5 or 8. And this is going by real number scores, by the way, like 5 out of 10 is average, 10 out of 10 is near impossible. Like, I'm not going by the 9.7 IGN whatevers. And with that, I thank you all so much for watching. I'm terribly sorry about how long this video took. It was a big boy, and it took a lot of redrafts. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and follow me on Twitter. If you are so inclined, please subscribe to my Patreon. You can support me from as little as £1 a month. Each donation truly goes towards turning this whole YouTube thing from my hobby into my profession. Thank you again. Goodbye.